Hello, everyone. I hope, I try every day to be fearless, but I hope that I can accomplish marvelous for all of you today. It's good to see you, and thank you for having me at NewFronts. I'm going to start, before I get into talking about teens and Generation Z and some gay things, I'm going to start talking about my upbringing, because it's kind of the source of where a lot of this came from. So names are a big thing in my family. I come from a big-ass Italian family, Catholic Italian family. So there are 5 of us, and 5 children in my family, and all of us have biblical names, right? So my dad wanted to name each of us after a saint or an apostle. So there's Courtney Ann, there's Robert Edward, there's Anthony, of course, Michael, and then there was me, Phillip Francis. And after me, my mom got her tubes tied. She told her doctor in secret because she couldn't tell my Catholic Jesus freak dad. And then guess what happened? Mom got pregnant after she got her tubes tied. So she had to go home and tell my Jesus freak dad. And my dad said, "Oh my God, this baby is a Jesus miracle. And so we're gonna name this baby after the Pope, John Paul. This is our baby John Paul after the Pope." So that's kind of what my upbringing was more or less framed after. So just imagine my 2 Italian parents with their very thick Boston accents trying to get all 5 kids down to go to school on time in the morning, right? So you hear them call up the stairs to each and every one of us. After I came out of the closet, though, my dad stopped calling me Phillip Francis, and he adopted some new, more colorful names for me. I think it was his way of relating, you know? So he was like, "Hey, Liberace, get downstairs." All of you who laughed are homophobic, so I hope please make a donation to GLAAD after this speech. Yeah, it's a shame. So Dad also called me Fruity Phil. Fruitcake was his favorite for my whole life. But there was a label that I wasn't super keen on. You know, the rest of it was bullying, but lighthearted bullying, you know, nothing I couldn't handle. But there was one day where my older brothers came home and they had this big masculine sit down with my dad, you know, so they bring him to the dinner table. And because the neighbors were talking about me, and they were saying, "You know, Dad, there's a difference between Phillip being gay. It's another thing for him to be a total faggot." And my dad said, "You know, he really is a disappointment." And if you know anything about a group of homosexuals, it's that we are very selective about the labels that we put on our bodies, ladies and gentlemen. So these weren't labels that I was super happy with. But as a kid who was growing up in this kind of a household, I was going to a very Catholic school. I had no gay people around me. I had no real teachers or role models to look up to. I felt more and increasingly alone. So somewhere after coming out and after being labeled a massive disappointment by my dad, I actually ended up getting a subscription to Vogue because I thought if my family wasn't going to accept me, I would need to find solace elsewhere. So I figured because I was watching Will and Grace, I knew that gay people were supposed to kind of talk to women about clothes. So I thought if I could learn more about fashion, that'd be great. So I got a subscription to Vogue and I started getting lost in stories about princesses and their weddings and Balenciaga and looking at pictures of Gisele Bündchen. Still didn't do it for me, definitely still gay. And there was one issue of Vogue in particular where I read something that completely shocked me. And there was an article about fashion designers supporting marriage equality. And this is around 12 years ago, right? So marriage equality only really recently just became law of the land. But Anna Wintour, as the editor-in-chief of Vogue, ran this piece boldly declaring that Vogue stood on the side of love and that everyone deserved a chance at marriage. And I remember feeling so alone, feeling so unloved by my family and by the people around me, and knowing for the first time what it felt like to be truly and adequately represented. So that was around 12 years ago, you guys. So imagine 12 years later, 10 years later, let's say, I am running on the treadmill at Equinox in New York City, and I'm on mile 405, and my phone starts ringing like crazy. And it's 8:30 in the morning, so I'm assuming it's an emergency. I'm assuming Teen Vogue has done something else. Lauren Duca's written something else that has made everyone mad. So I pick up my phone, and this very polite young woman with a British accent answered on the other line and said, "Anna will see you in 15 minutes. I wasn't in the office yet. It was 8:30 in the morning. So I jumped off the treadmill. I went and took a shower. I opened my gym room locker. And of course, the only thing I had packed was a mesh t-shirt, ripped jeans, and I had forgotten shoes. So I was wearing these weird running sneakers. And I had to go for my first one-on-one meeting with Anna Wintour in this outfit. So I show up to Anna's office thinking, I'm definitely fired. This is over for me. And Anna sat me down to actually announce that I was being promoted to co-lead Teen Vogue at the time and have full autonomy over the digital operation. And I was super excited. But the conversation started with Anna asking me why I thought Teen Vogue was growing so fast on digital. For these kind of past 2 years at this point, Teen Vogue had been the fastest growing women's magazine on digital media for 2 years running. So we had grown the website from 2 to 12 million unique visitors per month. And the answer to why we had grown so fast had almost nothing to do with fashion or beauty. In fact, when I came back to Teen Vogue, I knew that most of our audience was finding fashion and beauty tips on places like Instagram and YouTube from influencers they were following. So Teen Vogue necessarily had to pivot its content strategy to fill this white space, which was substance. So we covered for the first time reproductive justice, the election, sexual health, gender identity, how to negotiate a pay raise, and all sorts of other things. And the real response was that our readers really realized that they needed us. We invited a plus-size model to take us on her body positivity journey for a fashion video series that won a Webby Award. At the height of the Dakota Access Pipeline protests, we invited 6 Native American teenage girls to come to set with us and explain the real history behind Thanksgiving. P.S., it's genocide, and they flipped over a Thanksgiving dinner table in protest of the holiday. And during the height of the Black Lives Matter protests, we as a brand decided that we would take a stand and say Black Lives Matter as well, because we didn't believe that was a political statement. We thought it was a personal one. So all of that success at Teen Vogue had catapulted us into our success. And Anna looked at me, and I was terrified to say all of this to her because I was afraid she might think it was too risky. And instead, she said, "You have to stand for something." So a year later, I get invited to one more one-on-one with Anna Wintour. And this time, I wore something nice. And I forget what I wore, but I think it was cute. And at least this time, the question was more open-ended. And it was a question, it was a conversation. She said, "What do you think the future of publishing has in store?" And so I started talking about what I had seen from my time at Teen Vogue, specifically as it kind of related to the LGBTQ community. So I knew that this generation had grown up with marriage equality largely as law of the land, which is incredible. Thank you, Obama. And I also knew that this concept of gender was shifting pretty radically, right? That the trans rights movement is really a civil rights frontier that all of us need to be paying attention to. So I told Anna this, fully expecting, I don't know, 1.5 million questions or maybe an eye roll. I wasn't sure what I was going to get. Instead, Anna looked at me and said, "That makes sense." 4 months later, with her help and the help of a lot of other people, we lit up the Freedom Tower in the colors of the rainbow, and in partnership with GLAAD, we launched Them, Condé Nast's first ever LGBTQ publication, and the first dedicated brand launch at Condé Nast in over 14 years. Standing for something has been central to our brand's development and relevance in a competitive media landscape, and in a crowded media landscape. This is how we have made connections with our audience. And I know so much of this stuff. I talk to brands all the time. I know so much of this stuff can feel intimidating or daunting or even scary, but it really doesn't have to. So before I go, I have just 4 things I think all of you should keep in mind before you decide to stand for something. The first is that you have to take a stand on the things that feel authentic. You don't need to enter every single conversation, and you don't need to take a massive political stance. So a couple of examples, right? Patagonia is a great one, right? They took a really hard line against Trump and in defending national monuments, right, as part of their brand mission, which I think is great. Alternatively, another approach towards sustainability was Versace, Gucci, Michael Kors, all outlining their plans to go completely fur-free at their brands, which is huge in the fashion industry. And it signals to a younger consumer that they're prizing sustainability as kind of a brand pillar. I also think of Christopher Bailey's collection at Burberry. How many of you saw the Rainbow Check collection at London Fashion Week? Thank you, ma'am. Yes. So basically, Christopher Bailey took the classic Burberry check. I'm sure you all know what that looks like, at least I hope, if you don't Google. And he put, you never know. And he put a rainbow right through it. And it was this beautiful moment during the collection. So he asked them to photograph the collection, to be the first publication to photograph it. So we delivered this image. I was a little nervous, of these 2 boys who were dating in London. We delivered this picture of them kissing each other, like this, actually like a hard kiss, not like a cute kiss, like a kiss, And we sent it to Burberry, and they posted it on their Instagram, and it was the most successful Instagram post they've had since their beginning of Instagram, and they were one of the first fashion brands on that platform. So that was a huge deal. It showed that they stood for something and their audience rallied around that, because with a gay designer there for 17 years, that only made sense for them. These are external and internal policies that I think create brand affinity at varying levels of public risk. But number two is that you shouldn't be afraid of risk. If you have the privilege to sit in this room, to go to NewFront, to talk to all these high-power individuals who are next to you, you really shouldn't be afraid of risk. It should all be about being a leader. And being a leader means that your feet are often held to the fire. That is a good thing. But this is what I want you to consider when it comes to risk. Commenters on social media are not necessarily your customers, okay? So the amount of hate mail I receive from parents who are like, my daughters will never read Teen Vogue again. You don't know what your daughters are reading. You can't look at their phones. They open their phones 100 times a day. My audience numbers were never higher than when some lunatic started a bonfire in her backyard with my magazines, you know? So the New Yorker, Vanity Fair, at the height of their Trump crises, that was when subscriptions were going through the roof, right? If you have and take a stand for something, brand affinity gets stronger. The commenters are just a little bit louder, because they're a little bit crazier, okay? Number three, it's how and who makes your messaging. So Generation Z, we like to say, 44% of all US consumers by the year 2020, right? Over 50% of Generation Z is not white, and it's also shown in multiple polls that over 50% of Generation Z will be neither strictly heterosexual or strictly cisgender. So this is a huge statistic, because if you look around your boardrooms, your ideation and brainstorm meetings, if you walk through your hallways of your offices, what does your office look like? Does it look like the audience you're trying to reach? If you invite more people to the table, you may have more impactful brand messaging. Diversity is just good for business, period. And finally, only old people say that we should keep politics out of anything. So if you have ever been able to say at like a dinner table that, like, I don't know, let's not get political here, let's not talk about Me Too, right? That's probably because you're not maybe a woman. You've maybe never been sexually assaulted or sexually harassed. If you think transgender equality is something that is solely political, you're actually talking about someone's basic human rights to live, right? And so young people do not look at politics as this kind of segmented idea in our lives. We look at it as what is personal. And so our public sector and our government is more prone to nuanced conversations surrounding a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, instead of having a nice conversation over the largest youth march in our nation's history for common sense gun laws. Politicians would rather pick on Parkland kids than enact legislation to protect them. These are dark times, right? Let's just be honest. We have to wake up every day and decide what teenagers are going to read for the news every day. It's not just a matter of clever marketing or relevance to stand for something. It's literally your responsibility. And take it from me, a kid who once felt alone and by himself, and who once thought he may never find love. The images we create, the places they appear, on social, billboards, magazines, or otherwise, have the power to literally save a life. And that power is in all of your hands. Thank you.